Space Marine 2, it is perhaps the most anticipated Warhammer 40,000 video game there has ever been. Warhammer Fantasy has been getting a lot of attention because of Warhammer Total War, and 40k fans, understandably, are incredibly jealous. This is also a game that we kind of thought would never happen. The original game, Space Marine 1, as it will be henceforth referred to, came out in 2011. And so it's been, how long is that? 12 years since we actually saw the last game, and quite frankly, we just didn't think a sequel would ever come. Companies connected to the first game kind of went out of business, and also the lore behind the second company, which we're going to talk about today, where Titus is from, had kind of moved on. So it kind of looked like Games Workshop weren't really interested in having a whole Titus storyline. But I'm pleased to say that Titus is actually back. So he is going to be in the new Space Marine 2 game, and if you are new to Warhammer 40,000, you are jumping right into the lore, because Titus, as you can see right now, is fighting against some very big bugs, and this is recent Warhammer 40k lore. The Fourth Tyrannic War is perhaps the biggest incursion we've ever had into the Imperium, and it's a massive storyline in Warhammer 40k right now. So, as a Warhammer 40,000 fan, I am unbelievably excited for this game. A big part of that is just because it's going to get a lot of people into the community. I'm hoping that watching this video is going to be a group of people who have never really dived into Warhammer 40k, but they've seen this new game, they've seen it looks cool, and so hopefully this ends with you, of course, reading the entire Horus Heresy and the Siege of Terra and all of the novellas. I have no doubt that this is what's going to happen, because Warhammer 40k is amazing, and Space Marines are they're just the greatest thing that was ever invented, as we're gonna look at today in quite some length. Because today we're gonna look at the lore of Lieutenant Titus, and that brings me to a big problem I have with this stream, because Americans, I'm gonna have to say lieutenant. Okay, I know that you say lieutenant, and I googled it before today, and the reason Brits say lieutenant is because we misheard the French say like a V instead of say an F instead of a V at some point in time. So the British misheard the French and henceforth just said lieutenant. So I actually have a lot of sympathy for the Americans when they say it should be pronounced lieutenant. But Americans, there's two things. A, Games Workshop have said that they think it should be said lieutenant, and they do make the game. And also you have to remember, I live with these people. If I say lieutenant and the Brits get angry with me, then I have to deal with that for years to come. So I appreciate your candor and your grace with allowing me to say the word lieutenant, and please don't come for me too hard in the comments. But moving on, we're going to talk about the lore for Lieutenant Titus, because his lore is actually really interesting, and I also thought he's a great character to use as an introduction to explain to people more about Space Marines and Warhammer 40k and why it's so exciting. A lot of things have happened between the first game and the second game that are massive lore developments for the Ultramarines, and quite frankly, all the 40k fans are absolutely buzzing about these changes and just kind of want to see what the lore of Lieutenant Titus has ended up at. Titus is first and foremost a Space Marine, so if you're brand new to Warhammer 40k, you kind of need to know what they are. So I'm going to give you a quick summary of what Space Marines are now, and best be warned, they are the greatest thing you'll ever see.
Lieutenant Titus is an Adeptus Astarte, an angel of death, a living weapon of remarkable potency. Infused with the gene seed of his Primarch, psycho-indoctrinated for loyalty and fearlessness, and trained in every aspect of the sacred Codex Astartes. The Adeptus Astartes also benefit from the most devastating war gear of the Imperium, and the most ubiquitous of all Space Marine armaments is the vast range of bolt weapons that they employ. From pistols and rifles up to massive heavy bolters and other more esoteric weapons. These guns fire self-propelled micro-missiles whose bellicose machine spirits detect when they have punched deep enough into their targets, before detonating with tremendous force. Equally potent is a Space Marine's power armor. Incredibly durable, servo-assisted, and powered from a mounted backpack unit. The various marks of power armor afford their wearer an advanced suite of auto senses and a level of personal protection comparable to that of a light battle tank. Not only this, but advanced marks of armor like the Mark X armor or the ancient Terminator plate permit Battle Brothers to adopt highly specialized roles and wield devastating weapons with ease. These are also but a few examples of the vast range of specialized and finely crafted arms and armor the Adeptus Astartes have at their disposal. From revving chainswords to lethal plasma incinerators, all are wielded in the Emperor's name. Most Space Marine chapters boast a full battle fleet of heavily armed spacecraft, capable of transporting their companies around the galaxy.
The thing that I love about Space Marines is that you've basically got an army of supermen. Each one of them has speed and strength far beyond that of any ordinary human. They can actually survive in space on their own. They can see people's memories by eating their brains. They can spit acid. They are literally connected to their armor. They have an organ called the black carapace that actually kind of connects them to it. It's not just like standard armor. Not anyone can just power a suit of power armor, although there are other variants in the lore. But they are so interesting because of how complex they are. But also across the Space Marine chapters, we see a huge amount of difference. Now, if you're someone who's newer to Warhammer 40k lore, you might be wondering, like, what's the difference between a Space Marine Legion and a Space Marine chapter? And quite frankly, that's a really embarrassing question to ask. I can't believe you didn't know that. In Warhammer 40k, there's a very important event called the Horus Heresy. This is a massive civil war that takes place 10,000 years before the current storyline of Warhammer 40k. And if you have a look at this picture, you can see how it ended up. On the left, we have Horus Lupercal. He is standing over the dead Primarch, Sanguinius of the Blood Angels, and that glorious man on the opposite side of the screen is the Emperor of Mankind. Horus Lupercal led 8 of his Primarch brothers against the Emperor, and there were 9 Primarchs who stayed loyal to the Master of Mankind. The Primarchs are the sons of the Emperor, and each one of them is to a Space Marine what a Space Marine is to any one of us. They are beings of unbelievable power, practically demigods on the battlefield. The Horus Heresy ended when the Emperor faced Horus Lupercal on his battleship, the Vengeful Spirit, and Horus Lupercal would eventually be defeated by his father. After this happened, the traitor legions ran away. They went to a place called the Eye of Terror, and they have continued to terrorize the Imperium for 10,000 years since. The 9 loyal legions remained, but it was deemed by the Primarch of the Blood Angels... By the Primarch of the Blood Angels? Oh, that's so embarrassing. I must have delete this YouTube channel now. By the Primarch of the Ultramarines, Roboute Guilliman, that a single legion was too powerful for any one person to control. And so the legions were split up into chapters. 9 of the chapters kept their original names. They're what's called the first founding chapters, and so the Ultramarines Legion was far bigger than the Ultramarines chapter is. But they are still sons of Roboute Guilliman, and in fact, when it comes to the other chapters that aren't first founding, what we call the successor chapters, the Ultramarines have more than any of them. There's a huge variety in Ultramarine successor chapters. However, the Ultramarines stay incredibly loyal to the tenets of the Legion and the Codex Astartes. This is a set of guidelines written by the Primarch Roboute Guilliman, and in the first Space Marine game, you will be reminded very often by Leandros how you should stay incredibly strict to the tenets of the Codex Astartes. But we find out in the game that actually they're really more a set of guidelines than actual rules, to quote Barbosa. Titus is not just a Space Marine. He is a member of the Ultramarines. The Ultramarines are one of the most important legions in the Horus Heresy. They are the legion that arrives at the end of the Horus Heresy that forces the War Master to lower the shields on his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, so that the Emperor of Mankind can end him then and there. And into 40k, the chapter of the Ultramarines remains incredibly important.
Few, if any, chapters can match the efficiency, speed and skill with which the Ultramarines apply their deep learning of the Codex Astartes as it was penned by their gene father, Roboute Guilliman. On countless battlefields, the Ultramarines have outwitted, outfought, and outmaneuvered their enemies, striking repeatedly with gene-wrought might until the foe is utterly vanquished. For 10 millennia, they have learned and practiced the Codex's teachings, paying close attention to the most minute of detail. Many Ultramarines can recite swathes of the text by heart. The proof of the Ultramarines' learning is in their enormous tally of victories. They have quashed heretic uprisings, swept aside the pirate raids of the murderous Drukhari, and purged verminous Shrud infestations. They have defeated these foes in every manner of war describable, in scorching deserts, stifling jungles, labyrinthine ruined cities, and even in the depths of the oceans. The Ultramarines' homeworld of Macragge is a bastion of civilization, learning, and culture. It has been their base of operations since their Primarch was reunited with the Emperor. Heavily fortified, it is the jewel in the crown that is the Ultramarines' stellar empire, known as Ultramar. This grouping of worlds and systems pays no tithe to Terra, their resources dedicated to supporting the Ultramarines. Nonetheless, such is the skill with which the region is organized, Ultramar is able to provide troops and material for the aid of the beleaguered Imperium. As large and as powerful as Ultramar is, this makes it a prize hungered after for some of the Imperium's deadliest enemies, and the Ultramarines have been forced to fiercely defend it many times. The Ultramarines shattered High Fleet Behemoth in the First Tyrannic War, many of the chapter's greatest heroes losing their lives to halt the Xenos fury. They clashed again with the Black Legion heretic Astartes within the walls of the Fortress of Hera, their own fortress monastery, fighting with peerless zeal. And recently, all the vile and might of Nurgle's Plague Legions and the Demon Primarch Mortarian's disease-ridden ranks of Death Guard have not been enough to break the Ultramarines in the Plague Wars, no matter the fell diseases and maladies thrown at them.
So in the Ultramarines chapter, Titus was captain of the second company, and the second company are some of the most senior warriors in the chapter. He also has a very specific set of responsibilities that are very important in Warhammer 40k, and if you didn't like the Space Marine Leandros before I started this video, you are going to severely hate him by the time you finish watching this too.
Titus was a fitting captain for the second company. These warriors uphold the finest traditions of their chapter and are expected to set a shining example to their battle brothers. They are also the most likely warriors to be elevated to veterancy, and so will fight their hardest at all times to prove themselves worthy. So pronounced is their predilection for spectacular heroics that they have on more than one occasion earned censure from their chapter master Manius Calgar for conduct bordering upon reckless. The warriors of the second company storm into fray with the speed of a lightning strike. They formulate battle plans so risky and demanding that few other warriors would even countenance putting them into practice. They rely upon the element of surprise and their overwhelming post-human strength to utterly crush enemy resistance and seize victory for Ultramar. Yet, the skilled observer can see that the second company are anything but foolhardy. They fight in this fashion only because they know that they possess the discipline, unfaltering will, and martial skill to prevail, and they expect only the best of themselves and their battle brothers at all times. One of the great tragedies of Titus was that his principal duty as captain of the second company was to guard the shrine of the Primarch Roboute Guilliman. After the Horus heresy, there was a great scouring. Guilliman was wounded unto death by the demon Primarch Fulgrim. To preserve him, his sons put him into stasis, where he remained for 10,000 years. It was only during the Imperium's darkest hour that fate conspired to see him restored. However, when that day finally came, Titus was not around.
So this is something that I don't think gets spoken about in the conversation of Titus very often, but I wanted to talk about it because it genuinely breaks my heart in a way. The return of Roboute Guilliman, a Primarch to the setting, was phenomenally impactful for everyone in Warhammer 40k, and for the Ultramarines and Ultramarines fans this was amazing. Now it was the principal duty of Titus to protect his Genefather, to make sure that the shrine stayed safe, to make sure that his Genefather could never be killed. And he did his duty for decades and kept the Primarch safe. However, when the Primarch finally returned, when his homeworld was attacked, we can only presume that Titus was not there because of the actions of his brother Leandros. And we're going to have a look at why in a second, and we'll bring us on to kind of the big question we have on Titus going into the new game. In Warhammer Space Marine 1, Titus is the captain of the Ultramarines, and he has been fighting for the Imperium of Man for 150 years, which is not that old for a Space Marine, but by this point, we can assume that Titus is actually pretty old. Titus has 2 service studs that are gold, which are usually worth 100 years each, and 2 that are silver, which are worth about 50 each normally, and assuming that the Ultramarines go by the standard method of counting the years. So that suggests he's one of the longest serving Ultramarines. The main campaign of Space Marine 1 was on the Forge World of Graia. Initially, they were sent to deal with the Orcs, led by war boss Grimskull. However, eventually, the Chaos Sorcerer Nemeroth and his warband, the Chosen of Nemeroth, Heretic Astartes, traitor Space Marines, they came and they were also invested in the Forge World of Graia. The reason for this is because there was a special power source present on the planet. Now, ultimately, Grimskull would be killed and Nemeroth would be defeated. However, Nemeroth ascended to demonhood before he was killed. And when you ascend to demonhood, you essentially become part of one of the Chaos Gods, or potentially all 4 of them. And so you can one day return. And so I think it is likely we may see Nemeroth in the coming game. To Titus's actions, whilst they save Graia, a lot of eyes seem to be put onto Titus because he shows an unnatural resistance to the warp, to the chaos powers of the sorcerer Nemeroth.
Look there, Ultramarine. You have saved this world. I see the Ultramarines are human, after all.
More than you know, Lieutenant.
Inquisition is here.
His injuries appear chaos inflicted. You are certain of this charge?
Captain Titus has been corrupted by chaos, Inquisitor Thrax.
I am no heretic!
You lie! Only an agent of chaos could withstand such warp exposure.
I sent the demon to oblivion.
But did you have unholy assistance? We must know. You will submit to my authority, Captain, or the Inquisition must conclude that you have corrupted every Ultramarine under your command. Not to mention those who stand at your side.
Ignore his threats. Come on.
The Inquisition will destroy you, Mira, and the Ultramarines will be forever dishonored. Leave my brothers and the Lieutenant alone. I will come with you. I do not know why I can resist the touch of chaos, but I swear I will discover the truth.
We will discover many truths, Space Marine.
Codex Astartes leaves no room for doubt. You cannot touch the warp and emerge unscathed.
Codex Astartes is a set of rules. They guide us, shape us as Ultramarines, teach us to hold duty and honor sacred above all. But how we live with those rules is the true test of a Space Marine. And you have failed.
Leandros, what are you doing, man? That was so out of line. This is why the fans of Warhammer 40k hate Leandros with a fiery passion. Okay, so there is so much wrong with his behavior here. So he's turning on his captain, and the Space Marines are called Black Templars. They're zealot Space Marines, and they're not unique, but they're in the very rare group of Space Marines who worship the Emperor of Mankind as a god, and most Space Marines don't do that. But the Black Templars do, and they are there with a member of the Inquisition. The Inquisition are a very shadowy force in Warhammer 40k. They try to destroy the threats to the Imperium through any means necessary. They wield unbelievable power, requisition assets just as they need them, and they are often at odds with the Space Marine chapters. And so the fact that Leandros has brought them into the Ultramarines business is so out of line, especially given the fact that in the Ultramarines chapter, as in like every chapter, this kind of thing already has a contingency, which is that there are these Space Marines who are referred to as chaplains, and their job is to root out corruption. So if Leandros suspected his captain of corruption, he should have gone to the chaplain. You don't just go to the Inquisition. This is so out of line, and this is why everybody hates Leandros for this. It's such a betrayal. The other Space Marine in Space Marine 1, Sidonus, he unfortunately dies in the series. So, you know, Sidonus, RIP, we miss you every day. You saw him in the beginning video for Space Marine 1. But Leandros, honestly, I think a lot of fans are hoping we see some comeuppance for Leandros in the new Space Marine game. So yeah, if you could do us a solid there, GW, that would be awesome. And you know, that line Titus gives to Leandros, I think is so savage, this idea that you have failed. And it's worth pointing out that now Guilliman has returned. He says this to people like Uriel Ventris and Cato Sicarius, other Ultramarines, that not sticking to the Codex Astartes all of the time is what you're supposed to do. There's a quite an important rivalry in the Horus Heresy and Great Crusade between the Ultramarines and the Alpha Legion. And Alfarius Omegon, the Primarch of the Alpha Legion, he insults Roboute Guilliman. He basically implies the Ultramarines could never beat the Alpha Legion because they do everything by the book, and that becomes quite literal. However, when they do fight in the Great Scouring after the Horus Heresy, actually Roboute Guilliman takes him by surprise, and it's a wonderful moment. And Guilliman really proves that. He proves that having this set of rules is really important, but knowing when to break them is also really important. And Guilliman has a great love for those Space Marines who don't do everything by the book. So I think there's a good chance Guilliman will really like Lieutenant Titus. I think there's a good chance Guilliman will really like Lieutenant Titus. Now I'm just switching between the two of them. This is just... So Titus is taken by the Black Templars and the Inquisition. However, given the fact that we have a new Space Marine game, we know for sure that Titus was found innocent of any Chaos taint, and in fact, in the board game for Space Marine 2, we do get an update on his lore, and it's pretty interesting. Amongst the ranks of the Ultramarines, Lieutenant Titus has a reputation for decisive action and incredible warrior skill. He has fought countless battles in the Emperor's name and always emerged victorious, despite seemingly impossible odds. Fighting against the brutish orcs on the Forge World of Graia, to cutting a gory path through Tyranid invasion swarms amidst the jungles of Cardaku and across the hive spires of Avarax. Titus has faced and defeated the foes of humanity wherever duty demands. His chainsword and heavy bolt pistol have claimed the lives of many of humanity's monstrous foes. More than once, Titus has been forced to defend his reputation within his chapter, even being stripped of his rank as captain after accusations of supernatural corruption were levelled at him by the agents of the shadowy Inquisition. However, between his own mighty deeds and the patronage of the great Manius Calgar himself, Titus has risen once more to serve as the lieutenant in the Ultramarines' second company and continues to fight the Emperor's foes wherever he encounters them. And the other thing about his armor that's really interesting is you'll notice it's a bit different. This is called Mark X armor, and it's the armor of the Primaris Space Marines. Now this is another big change that we've had between Space Marine 1 and Space Marine 2, because I mentioned how amazing Space Marines are, but I didn't mention that they've also gotten better in recent years. So the Space Marines have had an improvement with the return of Roboute Guilliman. He ensured that actually we're going to improve upon the Emperor's work in creating the Space Marines. This was a pretty heretical idea at the time, and it made sure that actually the Space Marines got more abilities, they got stronger, they got faster, and they got even more organs. So as Firstborn Space Marines, they have 19 organs implanted into them. As Primaris Space Marines, they get an additional 3. They also have upgraded weapons and armor. So as a Space Marine, Titus has become far more dangerous than ever before. It's worth noting that the process to become a Primaris Space Marine was very dangerous for a long time, so potentially Titus risked his life in becoming a Primaris Space Marine. However, he is now back and stronger than ever. He's not captain, but he's ready to rip and tear against the enemies of the Imperium. So Titus has returned as a Primaris Marine, more powerful than ever. However, the question still has to be asked, and Titus has this question himself. What actually caused his resistance to chaos? At the end of Space Marine 1, Nemeros seems to think that there's some dark power watching over Titus, and that is what is providing him some sort of resistance to his powers. Now, there are some very classic options in the lore for what would give you resistance to chaos, so we're going to take a look at those now. One option for Titus's seemingly resistance to the warp and chaos is the fact that he could be a blank. Blanks appear in many Warhammer 40,000 books. They are beings that are said to be devoid of soul. We usually see humans of them, but they do exist in other Xenos races, such as the Eldar. To be soulless is to be known as a blank or an untouchable, a pariah or a psychic null. Whilst the trait is exceedingly rare, it does provide some severe benefits and negatives. Their brains essentially have a negative reflection in the warp. This will mean that to be near a soul is to have this sense of wrongness. Sentient beings that don't have a connection to the warp will somehow push the warp away from real space. This means that psychers in their vicinity will feel very uncomfortable. They'll be actually in pain when being around them. And we see this multiple times in the lore. Eisenhorn cannot stand to be around Bequin for very long because he is a psyker, and despite the fact that he loves Bequin in the novels, it actually brings him pain. This also suggests that Titus could not actually be a blank, because he has risen to the rank of captain. And how could this be possible if he spent all this time standing near Ultramarines librarians, standing near his brothers, and they didn't develop this deep hatred of him? It wasn't screened for in the Ultramarines trials, and none of the librarians over the decades realized that this Marine was actually a psychic null, a pariah, a blank. And surely his brothers shouldn't have liked him enough to ever promoted him to the rank of captain. So I think it's unlikely that Titus is a psychic null. However, it would make him a very useful Space Marine to have. The Sisters of Silence are a military arm of the Astra Telepathica, and they are used by the Emperor in the Horus Heresy and Great Crusade as part of the Talons of the Emperor. Their abilities make them very effective when fighting against demons, and they are instrumental in winning the secret war within the Webway. Another very common option in the lore for being resistant to chaos is being a psyker yourself. That provides you with some sort of defense. And it's very unlikely that Titus is a latent psyker because of course this would have been found out again by his librarian brothers. Another option, as the Black Templars have, is that devout servants of the God Emperor of mankind seem to possess some sort of natural defense against chaos powers and against warp trickery. However, Titus is an Ultramarine. He is not a Black Templar, and so it's very unlikely he sees the Emperor as some sort of divine being, and if he is praying to the Emperor as a god, this would be seen as heresy in his chapter, and he would absolutely be called to account by the chaplains. So these are the two most common answers. However, I think potentially we find the answer in Space Marine 1 very early on. So early on into the game, Titus talks about the fact that he's already fought against a Chaos Sorcerer before. In fact, his entire squad was lost when fighting against Servants of Chaos, and he's fought against them on multiple occasions. Potentially during this period, a chaos power started to watch over Titus, and it's granted him some sort of defense, and therefore this would be undetectable to the librarians and others within the chapter. Another option could be that the Emperor of Mankind himself is watching over Titus and is somehow extending some sort of protection to the lieutenant. It's also worth pointing out that the Thousand Suns are set to appear in the new Space Marine game, and Nemeroth ascends to becoming a Demon Prince at the end of Space Marine 1. I think it's pretty likely, therefore, that Nemeroth becomes some sort of Demon Prince of Tzeentch, and therefore he's going to be connected to this incursion. The storyline of, oh, what do you know, it was chaos all along is quite common in Warhammer 40k, and so I suspect we're going to see that Nemeroth is somehow capitalizing on the Tyranid invasion, or he's actually orchestrated this invasion on this planet somehow. I think that Nemeroth is probably going to want to come and find Titus and discover the true reason behind his resistance, or reveal to Titus why he is actually resistant to the warp, because there is something about Titus that is definitely odd. The other thing that's worth bearing in mind is that Titus has most likely spent time in the vicinity of his Primarch, and the Primarch generally hangs out with very powerful psychics. Tigurius, Eldar Farseers, Guilliman himself should have some natural kind of psychic abilities. So I think there's a good chance if he's got some sort of psychic corruption, it's going to be at a very high level. So maybe the Changer of Ways himself, Tzeentch, has actually decided that Titus, needs to fall to chaos somehow, and he's got specific plans in mind for the lieutenant of the Second Company. The other thing, of course, that I haven't mentioned about Titus is that his singular most powerful ability is that he is a named Ultramarine. This is by far the most powerful ability in Warhammer 40k. Characters who are blue and have names very rarely die in the lore before their time. So I think it is likely that Titus just has this writer's protection about him. But nonetheless, I am hoping that we get some really interesting lore around this character, and I cannot wait to get my hands on this game and play it and see what they actually do with him. Because whether it's a blank, whether he's watched over by some sort of dark power, whether the Emperor himself has taken an interest in Titus, I am pretty sure that we're going to see that Titus has this really interesting backstory to him, and is going to provide a really interesting point for the Ultramarines going forward, because whatever of these it is, it's going to be very impactful. But thank you so much for watching this stream. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please do like and subscribe and all of that good stuff. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by clicking the join button on the page below. If you're new to Warhammer 40k, do let me know. Are you as in love with Space Marines now as we all are? I really can't sell to you enough how great I think these characters are in the lore. If you are completely new to Warhammer, I do have a video for beginners designed to get you from someone who knows nothing about Warhammer 40k lore to knowing the entire main storyline, and I'll put a link to that in the description. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.